There are so many bosses in Twisted Metal. Some are actually really fun, giving an engaging challenge. Others are horrendous, making the game just not fun or just boring to play. Some people may use the word worst differently because it depends on the context and how you feel makes a boss actually really bad. Maybe it's too easy, too difficult, or a different reason entirely. So it will be fun to go through every Twisted Metal and pick the most worthless entry from every single game. Aside from the first one, because there's only one boss and you cannot drill Minion that bad. How could someone do it anyways when there's nothing to compare him to? So Minion sucks, and he's also the best from Twisted Metal 1, I guess, so we'll go right into Twisted Metal 2. Twisted Metal 2 only has two bosses, Minion and Darktooth, and both of these guys are honestly not bad at all, so it's really hard to pick between them. If I had a gun to my head and was told to pick which one is the worst, I would probably give it to Darktooth. Sure, Minion can freeze lock you, but so can everyone in Twisted Metal 2, so it's not really that big of a deal. Darktooth can be annoying to the point where a lot of people will just exploit him to the best of their abilities, best one being just drive in a straight line and dropping mines down. He'll run them over like an idiot and kill himself. He's a building on wheels while being able to annihilate mostly anyone in the roster due to this. You'll be crushed underneath his wheel feeling like the bitch you are. The aspect I really don't like about fighting Darktooth is the head. It feels unnecessary and it's just trying to gag you. Like sure, it might work the first time around, but any other playthrough you're like, alright, I get it, I don't care, I don't want to fight this thing because it's a brain dead easy battle. Feeling kinda pointless to even have as a part of the game. I really wish it was a one-time ordeal so no one needs to deal with it numerous times. There's not much else to say about the bosses here, both of them are honestly really great, so it's tough to find anything bad about them. Both are good for Twisted Metal bosses, there's not much to complain about. The actual game, on the other hand, is a different story. It's like sticking a pin needle into your urethra. Twisted Metal 3 has 3 bosses, and I really wish they kept this going, and it's something I completely overlooked until this video. Twisted Metal 1 has 1 boss, Twisted Metal 2 has 2 bosses, and only if Twisted Metal 4 had 4 bosses, we would have come full circle. Our bosses are Darkseid, Minion, and Primeval. Minion is the same as he always is, with the iconic special being a pain in the ass if you sit around him for too long. Thankfully, he doesn't spam the special too often unless you're on pure lunacy difficulty. Even still, it's not that bad. Primeval can be frustrating considering how much armor he has. If you cheat and play as him, you're practically unkillable. It's really that much. His special is very irritating, having tracking on the level of Smart Seeker's cheat, meaning it barely ever misses and gives the player AIDS, knocking you all around the level. There's been times he spammed it so much I reached a skybox and died. Granted, Massive Force was turned on, but still. It's very frustrating to go against. Thankfully, we have the infamous hole. Mostly any character can just push him right into that thing and he dies instantly. Having no hyperspace yet, Primeval sleeps with the air fishes. Even with both Minion and Mr. Evil's problems, I still think Darkseid takes the UR winner of Twisted Metal 3's worst boss. First off, it just feels very random. Like I don't even understand why he's a boss on the second level of all things, feeling very out of place and coming out of left field, throwing people off, not really having much of a reason to exist. Twisted Metal 3 wouldn't be much different if you just removed him from the game. When it comes to the actual fight, the special spamming is usually out of control, worse than both Minion and Primeval. It seems he does nothing but use his special attack over and over again, which of course freezes you. Anything regardless of the entry that freezes you is annoying, but Twisted Metal 3 does not have a shield, so that means if you get hit by the freeze, it could be over. And you need to be so careful because you have no way to block it from yourself, because with one freeze comes 100 of them, constantly locking you in place, using that flamethrower attack, just not feeling very fair. It does do a lot of damage as well, so most characters will die outright from a single freeze hitting them because the specials never end. Even on Cream Puff difficulty, you can die, and you might as well just put the controller down on the ground because it depends on if Darkseid wants to spam his special over and over again or not. If you don't get hit by the freeze, he is quite easy though. Usually driving around the sides of Darkseid removes his ability to freeze you, so he can't really do anything. Plus you being able to ram into him and flip him over, shooting him endlessly, is a really big positive on your end. The fact he feels like an unnecessary boss, plus being able to kill you outright in a blatantly unfair way, puts him at the bottom of the tier list of Twisted Metal 3 bosses. Twisted Metal 4 has the most bosses in the entire series, 9 in total. It does feel overly redundant to keep fighting these goofballs since most of them are not hard whatsoever or even feel like a boss. Minion, who traditionally had a threat, is a complete joke here. Everyone else smells like a moldy ham sandwich aside from Sweet Tooth, the infamous Tooth who ruined plenty of people's funds, especially as a kid. anyone unsuspecting will most likely game over to him. Having the most overpowered special in the history of Twisted Metal, Henchman is unreal with how much power it possesses, being able to hold you in place, light you on fire, shoot missiles, while all exploding one after another. Practically every starting roster character dies from a single use of it. Thankfully, we actually have a shield in this entry, hyperspace helps as well, but even still, Henchman will always follow you to get some damage off, even if it's minimal. Trying to battle him in a head-on fight is just not feasible to win. The second he activates the special weapon, you're going to need to run away, shield, or hyperspace out. Shielding needs to be done at a specific time, since if you activate it right away, you're still going to take a lot of damage. It comes to shock to most, considering how easy your first playthrough of 4 is. Having that ranking system implemented makes everyone start on Scout, essentially being easy mode in other games. Most people won't die very much, then you reach a boss who takes all your lives away, creating this strange disconnect between the player and the game. Players are then forced to exploit his pathing in some way to make him not use henchmen, or use different exploits. The most famous exploit being putting 3 proximity mines on the other side of a teleporter. It sends him right to the moon and he instantly dies. If you don't want to instantly kill him, you can go to the top of the carnival roof, because with Tooth, if you're not on the same level as him, henchmen will never be used. So if you're on the top of the carnival and he is not, or he's up top and you are not, to condemn yourself from this ridiculous nonsense, pussy play is required. Twisted Metal 4 Sweet Tooth is just terribly designed, he is way too overpowered, seriously, inexcusably so. There is no reason he should have released in this state. I get they wanted to make this fight an epic battle of the century since you're fighting the big hoss, Mr. Tooth, but no one in their right mind can look at this character and think it's okay. It's just not. Twisted Metal Black returns to having 2 bosses again, Minion and an all-new one called Snorhawk. Bosses were revamped to be more like bosses, adding an extra layer to them. Minion isn't terrible, just hitting the back panel is annoying. Thankfully, if you go invisible, the player can typically get a shot off to hit the back, requiring 1 or so missiles to be destroyed. Issues arise with Boarhawk. Bosses are usually engaging or a challenge, most of the time at least. Black tried to have Snorhawk as this super unique boss, and if you couldn't tell by what I'm calling him instead of Warhawk, the fight is just boring. Sure, maybe if you're doing it for the very first time, Warhawk could be an interesting experience. Fighting the boss is like this interesting, crazy thing. You're fighting a helicopter. When you're on your 3rd or 4th playthrough, I'm just checked out at that point. When I was going through the game with every character on stream recently, I could only stand to do 3, maybe 4 playthroughs. Otherwise, I'd be falling asleep on stream and getting banned. You need to wait for these stupid tankers to drive down, destroy them, either push it or wait for Warhawk to fly near it, then blow it up, repeat that 3 times, then you get to the actual battle of fighting this stupid ass thing. It's overly redundant and just not fun to do continuously. Twisted Metal is repetitive by nature, so unless you're trying to really break up that formula, bosses of this nature should not exist. I always felt Twisted Metal 2's bosses are perfect for this style of game. Minion is fine here, his fight is engaging to some degree, and you don't need to keep waiting. That's my main issue with Boarhawk. You need to wait for the tankers, wait for him to fly, wait for him to dock. It's just so goddamn boring. If someone dies on Warhawk, it becomes like pouring salt on an open wound situation where you need to repeat the snooze fest ass process again. Another terrible aspect is some character specials just not being viable or essentially useless against Snorhawk. Brimstone and Yellowjacket are great examples where you might as well try to swim through the raging rapids using your feet only. What's gonna happen? You're gonna fall off the waterfall and die. That's Warhawk, falling off a waterfall and dying. Most people I've talked to seem to agree with how truly boring Warhawk is. If anyone's saying this is the best boss in the franchise, clearly they've barely ever played the game to the point where their opinion is on the same level as listening to a 7-year-old telling you about a psychological function of the human brain. Small brawl bosses are interesting. It really depends on the difficulty you're playing on to dictate a real opinion. If you're playing on hard mode, both Trapper and Piecemeal are unacceptable. Seriously, I made an entire video venting my frustrations towards it. Their health pools are increased like 4 times, so you end up sitting there endlessly shooting them, bored out of your mind, especially with Piecemeal on Now Slaying. The weapon pickup timer is increased, taking longer for you to pick anything up. You spend most of your time just driving around waiting for something to spawn in, or for your special to regenerate. Depending on the random characters that spawn may or may not make it worse. If you get unlucky and go against Darkseid, Slam, and Hammerhead, you might as well just restart because your experience will be virtually unplayable. If I had to pick one boss for being the worst, Piecemeal, even on normal mode, deserves that title. Even with the health pool being nowhere near as absurd, the level itself creates an issue. As I mentioned with hard, weapons take forever to spawn in. Even on normal on Now Slaying, you have this issue because there are barely any pickups to begin with. so stocking up beforehand is a very important thing to take into account. Again, if you're unlucky with those spawns, all the weapons will need to be expended just to kill the enemies if they have a lot of armor like Darkseid. It was a nice attempt to make Piecemeal be a unique styled boss. With each enemy defeated, all the rest of them disappear, and then you have to fight Piecemeal, do a certain percentage of its health, then you keep repeating this process until you kill all 4 enemies and then Piecemeal himself. The fight itself, it's not difficult on its own. The environment in RNG really screws you over and makes it a lot more difficult to actually enjoy the battle. Piecemeal is usually very time consuming, being a 10 or so minute fight just to win. And for whatever reason, if you game over, this entire process needs to be repeated. Plus Piecemeal shielding, you can see how irritating this fight becomes. It's just so mind-numbing. I always end up losing patience halfway through the battle because it just drags and drags. If the player had enough weapons to work with and removed the ability for the bosses to shield, it probably wouldn't be as bad. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world. We're stuck dealing with this bullshit that just is not fun and makes him the worst boss in Small Brawl. Twisted Metal Head-On really sucks in the boss department. Depending on your definition of worst, any of them could be chosen. Cousin Eddie is a sad excuse of a playable character. The boss fight is just Diet Minion, having a similar special and function of battle, just being a watered down version to the point where it might as well not even exist. He has panels of hillbillies that shoot you, doing barely any damage. Instead of really thinking, you can just freeze him and then shoot the panels, making you question if I just fought a boss or not. Darktooth is a pathetic joke compared to what he was in Twisted Metal 2. His truck might as well be made by a 7-year-old for a book report project. He has little to no armor or any threat for the player. You can just run him down to defeat him, and it's just so sad how easy this is. I almost forgot to include him here, like that's how memorable Darktooth is in Head-On. Finally, we have Towertooth, also known as Exploit the Boss Fight, being the clear-cut, most miserable experience throughout Head-On. I genuinely hate this battle. Being a building on wheels, it seems intimidating and interesting at first, having 2 phases, one where you can shoot him anywhere, and a second where he has to shield, and then you need to angle yourself to hit him in the head. Towertooth drives around the level in a grid pattern, so dealing 50% of his health and getting through the first portion of the fight is quite easy. Then you reach the second with the shield, and I cannot for the life of me understand what these boneheads were thinking. Anytime you go near him, lightning comes out, making the player flop around like a fish out of water and not be able to move, being incredibly frustrating for anyone to deal with. Losing control of what I'm doing really pisses me off in a game. You might as well just rip the controller out of my hand and throw it in a trash can. I call Towertooth Exploit the boss fight because that's how you need to play every time you fight him. Every fight against him goes the same way. Use your machine gun upgrades, sit at an angle where he's driving around being an idiot and just laser him to death, or just use whatever weapons you have at your expense. Another aspect of terrible design is how some characters can't even use their special against Towertooth. That's always fun, bringing me right back to the Snorhawk situation, but somehow worse. Adding insult to injury, he drives in a path where health pickups are. Like, do these guys have room temperature IQs or what? Why would you put health in the path of a final boss, especially one that players need to angle themselves to hit and deal damage to? I just cannot fathom how terribly designed and awful this boss fight actually is. It is a worthless, disgusting battle that I never ever want to do again. Just terrible, terrible, terrible boss fight. Just holy shit, man. Twisted Metal 2012 has 2 stinkers. Brothers Grimm is the only boss that's actually fun to go against. Carnival of Carnage and Iron Maiden are a different story. This choice was very easy for me. Initially, I was looking and thinking maybe Iron Maiden because you need to deal with a flying nuke missile that controls like my asshole on a winter's night. The quote cage phase where you need to follow the head is kind of annoying. And after I looked at the Carnival of Carnage, some of the GTA Online minigames that are not very fun and feel kind of pointless, then I honed in on the helicopter portion of the boss. The last section shooting all of the Sweet Tooth mechs and I need to drop them into the head of this beast, then I couldn't for the life of me say Iron Maiden is worse than the Carnival of Carnage. Controlling Talon in 2012 is like a chimp trying to use a telephone. It's so awkward, strange, and it feels very unnatural. You gotta sit there for hours and hours on end just to make this control well. Dropping these bombs or the Sweet Tooth mechs, whatever you want to call them, can be very annoying since when you're trying to fly and deal with the god-awful controls, the bomb can fall off after a time limit, so you need to go pick up another one, becoming this tedious, unenjoyable process. They tried to make each of the bosses more expansive in comparison to the other games before it, but if you're not going to change the core system up, like why even bother? We're still playing through a few stages as a character and fighting a boss. These went to the point of being nonsense. Brothers Grimm was actually fun. We're doing what we know, fighting a big ass monster truck with some other features added on top. Great design and fun boss. No one wants to be flying around in a helicopter in Twisted Metal. Clearly it wasn't thought out very well, so the whole situation of Carnival of Carnage comes off very awkwardly, as I said, and most importantly, not fun. You could stick Iron Maiden here as well for a multitude of different reasons. People have both of them renowned as some of the worst bosses in the franchise, and it makes sense of why. I want to pick both, but needing to pick one only, Carnival of Carnage is slightly worse to me. And that is the worst boss in every Twisted Metal. I'm curious to hear what the worst boss for every game is for everyone else, or if yours line up with mine. I feel like the PS1 era just had bosses done very well aside from Sweet Tooth. It seems with later releases, they wanted to keep making bosses more expansive, but not changing the core gameplay to match it, feeling very out of place. The earlier bosses fit the simplistic nature of those Twisted Metal entries. Like, if you're gonna make the bosses more expansive, make the core gameplay more expansive. If it's going to be simplistic gameplay, make the bosses simplistic to match.
Wow! Do you want to be a cool person like everyone here? Join the Bonzi Lucky Club today! Thank you to everyone who supports the channel. You are a hero to us all!
Gina, that totally me. 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 Gina, that totally me.